So this summit is concerned with preparing you for the future and concerned with your future. I think what's very important when you explore the whole issue of transformation and transformation in view of the future is to get a sense of the narrative that you're trying to affect, the business narrative that you're trying to affect. And I think that the narrative of the future is going to be very different from the organizational narrative we have currently. The current organizational narrative sees business through almost a mechanical and an engineering lens. It understands an organization to be a system of orchestrated functions that produce money at the end of this process. The narrative of business of the future will have to be different. It'll have to see an organization not as a machine that produces money. It'll have to see an organization as a community of people who collaborate to serve customers and clients. If you do not create a world where the employee in the enterprise is there to make a deliberate and unconditional and discretionary contribution to the business, you will not succeed in the future. And the reason for this is that our mechanistic ways of looking at organization of the past are now quietly beginning to fail us. Because of the access of information, you can't, unless you have the ingenuity of your people on your side, you can't outwit your competitor. Any innovation in one market very quickly spills into another. So the question is, why should the initiative of your employee be the critical variable that accounts for your success into the future? And for me, it's kind of, there's a model, or there's a metaphor that helps one to understand that. And that metaphor is kind of like a baking one. So assume we have three bakers who work together to bake a cake. We're in this baking enterprise, and it takes us a whole month to bake the cake, and at the end of the month, the cake is sold. And I then take the equivalent of a slice of the cake home. Each baker takes an equivalent of the slice of the cake home. Clearly, there'll be a slice left, and we'll refer to that slice as either the profit or the surplus of the enterprise. And if you ask yourself, well, why does that surplus exist? And surely that surplus only exists because the total cake that was baked was bigger than what each individual took home. In other words, collectively, these people gave more than what they took. So the success of the enterprise of the future is going to be rooted on the fact that employees in the enterprise are willing to give more than what they take. They're willing to be in the enterprise to make a discretionary contribution in pursuit of the interests of the enterprise, and they're not just there to pursue their own interests. What you have to understand is that the core criterion that creates the conditions where people will work to make a discretionary contribution to the enterprise is concerned with how people are led. Fundamentally, people don't go the extra mile for organizations. People go the extra mile for people. So if you want to understand the condition under which an employee is going to make a discretionary and a deliberate contribution to a business, then don't ask yourself what is the business they're working for, but ask yourself who's the boss that they're working for. People give to people. Now, it stands to reason that people are not going to give to a boss who's fundamentally there to take from them. That's naive. But you have to understand that our current way of framing being in charge of people, our current way of framing hierarchy in organizations, which then also translates into this understanding of that enterprises are machines that produce money. That way of framing the job of the leader, of the person in charge, basically says the job of the leader is to achieve a result through people. That articulation of the intent of the leader of the enterprise does not produce people who come to work to make a discretionary contribution to the enterprise. That way of framing the intent of the enterprise produces people who come to work to get as much out of the business as they can for giving as little as possible. Because that way of framing the intent of the leader is a taking intent. If I say to you, my job is to achieve a result through you, I'm taking from you. And there's a very simple exercise that we can go through that helps to demonstrate that case. Let's assume you've got two people working for you. The one person's name is Joe. Maybe we should call him Yusuf, out of honor of the place that we're in. And let's call the other person Adnan. It's a nice word, Adnan. It rolls off the tongue. So, you go to Joe, Yusuf, and you say to Yusuf, Yusuf, in 1980 I did what you have to do, and what I did worked. Don't argue with me, shut up and go and do what I did. You go to Adnan and you say to Adnan, Adnan, in 1980 I did what you have to do. It may be helpful to you, take a look at it. Now, it stands to reason that you're not going to get a moment's worth of discretionary effort out of Yusuf, and Adnan will work his eyes out for you. In other words, Adnan will be here to make a discretionary contribution to the enterprise. But now, if you think of these two interactions of means and ends, you actually have a very interesting patterning. Because in the Yusuf case, if you say to Yusuf, Yusuf, in 1980 I did what you did, what I did worked, shut up and go and do what I did, you're basically seeing Yusuf as the means in order to achieve a result. In other words, you're achieving a result through the person. If you examine the Adnan interaction, if you said to Adnan, in 1980 I did the thing that you have to do, and what I did worked, it may be helpful to you, take a look at it. It is clear that that framing says that you could have a completely different outcome from what you had in 1980. It's conceivable that the outcome could be a complete catastrophic disaster. In other words, your intent in that instance is not to get the job done. Your intent is to teach Adnan something. I beg your pardon. In other words, in the Yusuf case, you're using the person, Yusuf, as your means to get a job done. In the Adnan case, you're using the job as the opportunity to teach Adnan something. That inversion of means and ends indicates that there's been a change in your intent as the leader. In the Yusuf case, your intent is to get something out of Yusuf. In the Adnan case, your intent is to give something to Adnan. The key distinction then is in the Yusuf case, you're using the person as the means to get the job done. In the Adnan case, you're using the job as the means in order to teach Adnan something. There's an inversion of means and ends. And in fact, it's only in the Adnan case that you're describing legitimate leadership. So if you want to account for the leadership of the future, the leadership that will in fact head communities of people who collaborate to serve customers and clients, then you have to understand the leader who's in charge of a group like that does not say, my job is to achieve a result through people. He says, and hold on to your seat, my job is to achieve people through results. He uses the enterprise as his means to cultivate extraordinary people. And because he does that, he's changed the direction of service in the reporting relationship. He's no longer there to get anything out of the subordinate. He's there to give them something. Now, you might say, this way of framing the intent of the leader, to say, my job is to achieve people through results, sounds completely irrational. But I'd like to suggest to you that's exactly what happens in a team sport. So let's assume you are a member of a soccer, well, maybe it'd be more culturally appropriate. You're a member of a cricket team. And you're doing really well. You're right at the top of the league, and you have a coach who you love to bits, most extraordinary coach. And this unfortunate coach gets poisoned in a hotel room in Kingston. So you've lost your beloved coach. And the club sources a new coach for you. You've never met this coach before, brand new coach. The first time you meet this coach says to you, listen folks, so he meets you in the training room, or in the change room, He says to you, folks, let's just get roles right here. All right. My job as your coach is to achieve a result. I'm going to use you as my players in order to achieve that result. And if you looked into this coach's eyes, but you thought, this idiot actually believes what he's saying, you would loosen the wheel nuts of his car because of the arrogance. Because surely whose job is it to achieve a result? Well, actually, it is not the coach's job to achieve the result. It's the player's job to achieve a result. Does that mean to say the coach doesn't have a job? Well, of course he's got a job. His job is to coach the player. Now, that doesn't mean to say from the coach's point of view, the job that's being done, the game that's being played, in other words, and the results are irrelevant, because clearly they're not irrelevant. You can't coach a game if you don't know what's happening on the field. You can't coach a game if you don't know what's happening on the scoreboard. But it doesn't make those two variables your job. It makes them your means to do your job. The coach goes to the game on Saturday. He looks at what's happening on the scoreboard. He uses that as his information, whereby he coaches the player on Wednesday. He uses the task and the result as his means whereby he enables a person. His product is not the result of the business. His product is extraordinary people. Now, folks, as a group of leaders, if you commit to that from this moment forward, I can guarantee you, if you commit to the role that your job is to cultivate exceptional people, and the enterprise that you run is a gymnasium to help you enable exceptional people, your organization will take off. Why will it take off? Because you'll cultivate people who come to work to make a discretionary contribution to your business. They will be part of a community of people who collaborate to serve customers and clients. They're not just going to be people who inhabit roles or a box in an organogram. So I think you have an immense opportunity. And that opportunity really is to produce a future which is benign enough, magnanimous enough, for there to be space for all of us into the 21st century. Thank you very much.